All right, so let's get started. I think we're ready. So firstly, thank you for joining us. I see a lot of people that signed up for the virtual tour that I know, and some that are new to me, and some that I've even been to Rome with before. A little bit about myself. My name is Mara Walsh. I'm a group leader with EF Tours. I started leading tours as a Girl Scout leader, taking girls and their families to national destinations each summer. I have since expanded my travel program and added adult tours as well as family-friendly tours. You'll see me look over a little bit sometimes because I have another monitor on the side, so sorry about that. I'm working slides and some other things at the same time. Since we're not able to travel this summer and most of us are craving the experiences we gain while traveling, I thought it would be a fun way to travel if we did it virtually. And since my group was due to land in Rome on June 29th of this year, special shout out to those folks from my group. You see I have my destination, my departure t-shirt on from Oakville Girl Scouts. What better place to visit on a virtual tour than Rome? But before we get started, I want to share with you 2 ways that you can interact with this event and with me and with Elena, our tour director. During this virtual event, feel free to ask questions about Rome or my travel program by using the Q&A link on your toolbar. You should have a black toolbar either at the top or the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you can add questions. We are also going to have an interactive poll. In fact, I hope everybody's on now. We're going to have that poll right now. And that poll will give me a gauge of how connected you are with Rome. So the question is, what's your relationship with Rome? You could say, I've been and can't wait to go again. I'm booked on a tour, but unfortunately I couldn't go this year, but I'm going to go in the future. I've never been, but I plan to attend in the future. Or I've never been at all, but I am hoping and loving to experience it through this virtual experience. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to put your vote in on the poll. It looks like we have about 75% of people on our Zoom call that have dialed into the poll right now. I'm going to give you 1 more minute and then I'm going to end that poll and you will see the results. So it looks like most people on the call, more than 50%, have been to Rome and can't wait to revisit. And there's a slew of people that also, can't wait to go, they're booked to go. So it looks like we have a lot of people who know Rome well. Okay, so what does that mean to us? Well, regardless of how connected you are to Rome, we hope to enhance that today on our virtual tour. And most of us know a tour wouldn't be complete without a fantastic tour director. A tour director is like a personal travel concierge who stays with your group from the minute you arrive until the minute you depart. They share their world of knowledge. They manage all of the travel plans and make sure your experience is stressless and full of positive experiences. And hopefully you're making lifelong memories at the same time. These are by far the most important people in your group. And you can imagine that if we're not traveling, they have no work. I'm hoping that this virtual tour will not only reignite our desire to travel, but allow a tour director to do what she does best and share her knowledge and passion. And one of my absolute favorite tour directors just happens to be from Italy and was excited to reconnect with past and future travelers to share her passion for Rome when I brought this idea to her. For those traveling with me next year to Europe and everyone else who's attending this tour, I'd like to introduce you to and hand over this event to our amazing tour director, Elena Serrano.
Thank you, Mara. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this event. Now, I am going to share my screen in a second because I've put together a little presentation, a slide presentation with all the images that I wish every time I was doing a guided tour I could have with me to share with the people that I'm with, and I can't because otherwise I would be carrying around pounds of papers with me all the time. So this virtual walking tour really gives me the chance to enhance the way I do my job. Now, as Mara said, she was very, very kind with me. We've been friends since our first tour together 4 or 5 years ago. As Mara said, I work as a tour director with EF and other companies, and I also work as a local guide in Rome, where I currently live. So let's start sharing the screen. Of course, it goes without saying, I see we have 138 people participating, some of which I know, some of whom I don't. I am very nervous, so please excuse if my voice falters a bit throughout the presentation. So here we go. Welcome to our virtual visit of the city where I currently live, Rome, AKA the Eternal City, a virtual walk with me. Now, a little outline just to give you an idea of the steps that we're going to go through. At the beginning, I'm going to get into a general intro regarding Rome and the Mediterranean Sea. Delve a little bit into all the diversity that we have in Italy and all the aspects of our everyday life. And this first part will be for sure redundant for the ones of you who have been already to Rome or Italy in general. But I wanted to keep in mind also that there are people who've never been, and so give them a general idea of the place that we are going to go through virtually today together. After this first intro, we're going to delve into our 4 stops virtual walking tour through the streets of the central part of Rome. And I have included also 2 pit stops for refreshments along the way. Now together, the main sites that we will encounter will be Piazza di Spagna, or the Spanish Steps, the Trevi Fountain, the Pantheon, and our very final stop, Piazza Navona. So let's start. So my first slide is included in this presentation just to give you a rough idea of where Rome is within our world. This is Rome's latitude shown in the image. And you can see, I found it interesting when I learned it myself, that Rome is on the same parallel as New York City. And I know many of you guys live in the Philly area, which is more or less at the same latitude. So we do share the same positioning on the 41st parallel, as well as Beijing and many more other famous cities and big metropolitan areas throughout the world. If there's any of you who live on the West Coast, to give you an idea, the parallel marks the border between California and Oregon. So just to give you an idea of where it is placed on the West Coast of the US. Even though we do share latitude, we have very many differences, especially when it comes to weather. I know you guys in the northeastern part of the US are used to very cold winter, very rigid, with lots of snowfalls and sometimes blizzards. And this is something that we almost never experience here in Rome. The climate is way milder. Winters are kind of warm all throughout the winter months, and it snows extremely rarely. And I am not from Rome originally. I am from a city in the north of Italy, Milan, which is way closer to the Alps. And I am used to growing up seeing snowfalls pretty much every winter. And from the north, we make fun of the Romans because given that they're not used to snow, as soon as they see a snowflake, they shut everything down. They call the army, they shut schools, they go to supermarkets, buy all the canned food that they can find. So we do make a lot of fun of them. Now, because of the uniqueness of this event, I did include some images of famous landmarks in Rome covered in white when it did happen that a snowfall happened in Rome. So this is the Colosseum, and in another image, again, the Colosseum with its lawns in front of it, all covered in white. And this one is the beautiful St. Peter's Basilica with the huge square in front of it, all covered in white. Now, if you are able to read the date on the picture, you will see that this snowfall happened 2 years ago. And this was really an event because it never snows this much. So this was really something that everybody was taking pictures of. So going back to our climate, as we said, we have a lot of diversity. I'm from the north where the Alps are, our geographical national border between us and the countries that we border with to the north, and all the way down to the southern coastlines, which have Caribbean styles water, as you can see in this beautiful satellite image of the whole peninsula. So we said where Rome is latitude-wise, but where is it really? Within Italy, that's where it is. Kind of in the middle of the peninsula towards the south. It is considered the south part of Italy. It is very, very close to the coast, even though it doesn't overlook the seashore. For the ones of you who have been to Rome, you probably flew into Fiumicino Airport, which is in general in Italy our biggest international air hub, and it caters for the capital. And from Fiumicino Airport to downtown Rome, it's a mere 30 to 45 minutes drive if there's no traffic. So Rome is very close to the coastline, even though, again, it doesn't overlook the water. The Mediterranean Sea is the very reason of this mild climate that we have here in the south of Italy. And it doesn't only determine our weather throughout the year nowadays, but it is also the reason for basically all of our history, I would say. And not just the Mediterranean Sea, which, as you can see from the image, it doesn't get the right to be called an ocean because really it's a puddle more than an ocean. It's a very, very small body of water. But more than that, the position of Italy within it. So as you can see, Italy is smack in the middle of this body of water. And this meant that throughout our history, whenever a foreign people living on the coasts of the Mediterranean in other lands decided to set sail, to get in a boat and start sailing, at some point they would bump onto our coasts. And this resulted in two possible outcomes. One was just the encounter of these foreign people with the people living in the Italian peninsula in antiquity. They were called Italics before the Romans, the ancient Romans. And so, of course, an influence between the two people. Or the second possible outcome, which happened more frequently, I would say, is an actual invasion and at least people who tried to conquer part of our lands. And sometimes they succeeded, resulting in a foreign domination that lasted more or less, some of which lasted for centuries. So you can imagine how much influence these foreigners had, the domination of these foreigners had and have to this day on all aspects really of our traditions, of our culture, and on our everyday life. So just to give you an idea, I did a little graphic of the different visitors throughout the ages. The first were the Carthaginians, the famous Hannibal that came on over land with his elephants crossing the Alps very famously, but they were coming from modern Tunisia, so they also set sail from the northern coast of Africa. And then we have the Mycenaeans. This is in chronological order, coming from northern Turkey. People from the island of Crete at the height of their history. Of course, the Greeks in classical times. And then more recently, in more modern times, we also had Spanish and French, but coming over land, who came, conquered part of the land and dominated over it for centuries. So you still, again, see influences of all these invasions in our everyday life nowadays. This is the main reason for the diversity that you can experience in Italy if you change areas. Probably the best known is our cuisine. And I know I hope I'm getting you hungry, since I know that with the time difference, you guys will be having dinner probably after this presentation. Now, you know that our cuisine is very varied. If you change areas in Italy, you'll find very, very different traditional recipes. So this stems from also those invasions. The languages that we speak in Italy. Of course, the head language is Italian, which comes from Latin. So they do have they do share an origin, but it has now spread into so many different dialects that for me, coming from the north, if I go to the south, sometimes I will not understand what people say if they speak in their very strict dialect. And then all the way to our administrative division nowadays, which is in regions. It's a little bit like you guys have states, even though we are not a federation, but these regions do have a say in many aspects of their policies, exactly as your states in the US. And these territories, the divisions, the borders were determined throughout history because of all the different dominations that we had. So this is another example of diversity that we have in Italy that stems from our history. Now back to what we are going to focus on today, back to Rome, and let's start our 4 stops virtual walking tour. Now this is the typical touristic map of Rome. You would be handed this at your hotel lobby if you were visiting, if you were a tourist staying at a hotel in town. It doesn't show you the whole area covered by the city of Rome. Rome, area-wise, it's one of the biggest cities that we have in Italy. It's a huge metropolitan area. This map only shows you the center, the downtown part, which is where the majority of the monuments, the remains from antiquity, the archaeological areas are housed. And if you look at the left of the map and you see that light gray serpentine, that is the river Tiber that goes through the city. And you can tell that all these monuments that are highlighted in brown in the map are almost all of them concentrated on the right of the river for us in the map, which is the left bank of the river, because this area was the original area of Rome. So in ancient times, what is the downtown today was the actual city where the ancient Romans lived. And that's why most of what they left is now concentrated in this area. On our walking tour, we're going to start up here at the Spanish Steps. We're going to then walk a very short way to the Trevi fountain, move on to the Pantheon, and then finally we're going to end up in Piazza Navona, one of the most beautiful squares in Rome, in my opinion. So let's start. Piazza di Spagna, the Spanish Steps. I left the Italian name at the top of the slide because it is not the exact literal translation in English. In English, it's the Spanish Steps. It's a name that refers to the whole area of the square. In Italian, if you had to translate the Italian name literally, you would in English you would call it the Square of Spain. And I'm gonna explain why and what Spain has to do with this area of town. We have several monuments on the square. We can start with the beautiful Barcaccia fountain, which is a 1600s Baroque fountain. It was sculpted by one of the most famous artists of the time. He was very beloved by a couple of popes that reigned throughout his life. And so he became famous because they asked of him different works to decorate the squares and the streets of their city. So he was very, very famous. Bernini is his name, and we are going to encounter other works by him throughout the city. The fountain is a very peculiar one, always very recognizable in photos because it has this very strange shape of a half-sunken boat. And this was done by the artist for a very practical reason. We are at a very low point in the city where there's no much pressure. The water pressure is very, very low. So to overcome this, he couldn't really build a typical looking fountain thrusting upwards. So he had to go around this problem with a different design, and he decided a half-sunken boat would overcome it perfectly. And of course, he did a great job. Moving on, at the very top of the Spanish Steps, there is a church that was actually the first thing that was built in this area, the first monument built in this area from the 1500s. And it is still today, as it was originally, it is still today a Catholic church that caters to the French community. So it is a French Catholic church. It's called Trinità dei Monti, the Trinity of the Mountains, literally. They are connected, the two monuments, with this beautiful staircase of 163 steps. And that is what you call the Spanish Steps. This was the last thing added to the square to connect the fountain and the lower level of the square to the church up top so that people could stop having to climb a muddy side of the hill to get all the way to the church and to service. In the springtime, the steps get beautifully decorated with azaleas from bottom to top. So if you are planning on coming to Rome, the springtime would be a perfect time to come to see it all in bloom. And then I included an aerial photo just to show you the actual distance that there is between the church that you can see the bell towers of on the left of the image all the way down to the fountain. So the steps are not too steep, but they were designed not to be too steep. They were designed in this terrace style, but they do cover a long distance to connect the two levels of the square. This image, I put it in just to show you this square from above and the very odd shape that it has. It's not your typical square shape. It's kind of a bow tie. And I included it because usually when someone comes to Rome and visits as a tourist, they concentrate all their attention, or the guide that they're with concentrates all their attention on the bigger part of the square, which is where all the monuments that we've seen so far are located. So just to show you on this image, you've got the church up there, the fountain down there. But on the other side, on the smaller part of the bow tie, is the building that actually gives the name to this whole area. So why Spain? As we said before, because of this building. I hope you can see the arrow down there. It is a very old building built in the 1500s that since then houses the Spanish embassy to the Vatican. So because to this day, so because of the presence of this building, the whole area came to be known as the Spanish area. And nowadays, even the underground stop, you can see where the white M on red background is. Spagna means Spain in Italian. So even the underground stop in modern times got its name from this. Now, all of this is very well, and we've seen the main monuments on the square together. But because I knew that so many people tonight would have been to Rome already. You probably already knew all this, and you've seen these monuments in person. So I really wanted to give you something more than usual. And there is a story that I find beautiful that is linked to this area of Rome and specifically to the square. And it's the story of three sisters. They were the Fontana sisters. Now, these three ladies, they lived at the beginning of the 1900s. They were not from Rome. They were from another part of Italy, but they came to Rome very, very young for their job. They were seamstresses, and before World War II, they moved to Rome and started working for someone. But very soon, they were really good at their job. And very, very soon, they decided to open up their own workshop and their own atelier or boutique. And they started selling their own designs and their own clothes designed and manufactured by them. Maybe some of you know that at that time, and we're talking about the 40s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, Rome was very, very famous in the US for being what was called Hollywood on the Tiber, because we had, and still have to this day, movie studios, cinema studios here. It's called Cinecittà. It's exactly as your Hollywood. And many US movies were shot in Rome. And so many movie stars were actually living in Rome, at least for some time, during the shooting of the movies they were featured in. And these three sisters, they, by chance, a little bit by chance, and I think that's what makes the story even better, they met with some of these stars and they became three of their favorite designers. So much so that they wanted their clothes for big events designed by these three sisters. And I found pictures of this. So the first instance when this occurred was when Linda Christian and Tyrone Power got married in Rome in a beautiful church that is within the ruins of the Roman Forum in 1949. And in this occasion, Linda Christian wanted her dress, her wedding gown, to be designed by the three sisters. And this is what gave them fame, because this was the wedding of the year, or maybe of the century. It was followed by so many people. I have included a link of the footage of the arrival of the bride and the groom at the church, and of how many, there was an ocean of people in the streets wanting to see the bride and the groom arriving at the church. I couldn't show you the video during the presentation because I know that on Zooms, it goes out of sync right away, and so it doesn't work well. So we will send out all the links that I will refer to videos during the presentation afterwards. So if you're interested, you can go take a look. Our second photo regarding the sisters is Audrey Hepburn in her own wedding gown designed by the Fontana sisters. We see two in the photo with her. Now, this dress also has a nice story behind it. This was the dress that she wanted designed when she was going to marry Hanson. But this wedding never occurred because a couple of weeks before the wedding, they called it off. And so she never wore the gown. So what she decided to do, instead of just keeping it, she left it with the sister with a request that if they ever came across a bride that didn't have the money to pay for her own wedding gown, they would gift this one to that bride, and it would be her gift to her for her wedding. And this actually happened in 1960, so 8 mere years after this photo was taken. There was a radio program here in Rome. And this girl, she was a farmer from the countryside outside of Rome. She went on the program and she was telling the speaker of how great difficulty she was having in organizing her wedding because she had economical difficulties, so she couldn't pay for it. And the sisters heard the program and decided she would be the perfect recipient of the gift that Audrey Hepburn had left behind. So the dress was actually worn in 1960 finally. We have Liz Taylor, also with the three sisters and one of their creations. Ava Gardner wanted the costumes for several of her movies designed by them. And finally, you've got JFK and Jacqueline at a gala in the US in 1957 with one of the three sisters who became her close friend, actually. So if you ever come back to Rome, if you've been, or if you are planning on coming for the first time, you might be interested in knowing that the workshop where the three sisters started working out of has been turned into a foundation in their honor. It is kept by their heirs, and it is in the same building where they had their workshop. It's up there, just off the square where the Spanish Steps are. And it is a very interesting place to visit. There is a permanent exhibition of all the historical gowns, the original ones that the sisters designed and created for the famous people that were their clients. I like this story also because this marked the beginning of what nowadays it's a very famous label throughout the world. It's called Made in Italy. Made in Italy marks something that has been designed and produced within our borders. And it is a standard of quality nowadays in the fashion industry. And this all started with these three sisters because until their time, there was no Italian fashion at all. We were really good at manufacturing good clothes because we had really good manufacturers and very high quality fabrics. We had since the Middle Ages, but we didn't design anything. All the designs came from Paris. And Paris fashion was all the rage until World War II. But these three sisters, together with another couple of Italian designers contemporary to them, really changed the rules of the game. And being three women at that time and making this happen, this story blows my mind every time. So again, my first suggestion for your next trip to Rome. Now back to our map and onto our second stop. We started at the Spanish Steps and we're gonna now take a very short walk to the Trevi Fountain. So here you have it. This is a frontal image of the 1700s fountain. This is probably one of the most well-known fountains, I want to say, throughout the world, not just in Rome and in Italy. It is a beautiful, huge monumental fountain. I did include also an aerial photo because it's so big and it is confined in such a tight space, as you can see from the image, that it is very difficult to take it all in once you're in front of it. So from up above, you can really see the shape of the fountain, all the statues that decorate it and how monumental they are, and the beautiful facade that acts as a backdrop for this beautiful Baroque fountain. There is a tradition when you come to Rome, and it's only if you want to come back, because they say it does work. So if you don't want to come back, don't do it. But if you do want to come back, they say that you need to have your back at the fountain and you want to have a coin in your hand, whatever currency, whatever value, it doesn't matter. And you want to toss it over your left shoulder into the water of the fountain. And I found this picture that I didn't know about. These are 5 US athletes, actually. They were in Rome in 1960 for the Olympic Games that were held here in that year. And so this is them 5 tossing the coin behind them in the fountain. The coins in the fountain are a lot. Whenever you come and you look into the water, you always see it full of coins. They do get collected once in a while to, of course, empty it out, and they go out to charity. They fund a place that provides food to homeless people here in Rome. And if you are curious to know, roughly, they collect 3,000 euros or $3,000, more or less. That's the currency exchange nowadays, a day. So they do collect a lot of money for this charity. The fountain is, of course, extremely famous, and I hope you guys know what this movie is from this Italian movie, La Dolce Vita. There is also an expression nowadays, La Dolce Vita, baby, from 1960. Federico Fellini was the director, and it has this beautiful scene with Anita Ekberg diving and dancing in the fountain and calling onto her co-actor Marcello Mastroianni. And this is one of the links that I included of the scene where she dances at nightfall, she dances in the fountain. Of course, this is something you cannot do. So don't think about doing it. This was something that the right was granted only for the shooting of the movie. This is the movie poster. If you've never watched it, I suggest it. It's a beautiful 60s movie. The fountain is also famous, at least here in Italy. I don't know about you guys. You might want to let me know, because of two, actually, instances when it was vandalized by the same guy, which is already something strange, 10 years apart from each other, the two events. So this is a photo of the first instance when this happened in 2008 and 2007. And then he did it again in 2017. What he did is he poured red dye into the water of the fountain. So it's crazy. He calls himself an artist. I will leave it to you guys to decide if you think the same or not. He did it as an act of protest. And granted, he chose a dye that would not permanently affect the fountain and ruin it. But because the water runs in a closed cycle, the piping system is in a way that the water runs in a closed cycle, you can imagine this tainted the whole fountain, no? Because of course the water went through the piping with the dye. And it cost money to restore it and to clean it afterwards. And this was the punishment for the guy. So he was of course arrested, he had to pay a fine, and he had to pay for the cleaning of the fountain after this act. And then after some time, the fountain needed a real restoration. Of course, sometimes you have to restore these monuments, and this happened. It took a little over a year, 17 months only, to an Italian fashion house who sponsored this work of restoration, spending a little over 2 million euros. And the photo shows you the cleaning of all the surfaces. So it was a cleaning, but it was not just a cleaning. They also redid all the piping system. They redid and updated the filtering system so that the water runs clean and doesn't corrode the stone that the fountain is made of. And they also redid all the lighting systems. So they placed hundreds of LED lights in specific spots so that we can now enjoy the fountain at night as well with a beautiful illumination. Now, the year after the restoration was completed, as you can see from the slide, it was completed in 2015. In 2016, this Italian fashion house, the name is Fendi, was celebrating its 90th anniversary. And the city granted the right to use the Trevi fountain for the celebration of this event. And they did a fashion show over the water of the fountain. This was a big event in the summer of 2016. I didn't attend because I was on tour with Mara. This happened in June 2016. This was the first time that we went on tour together. But as you can see, they placed this almost invisible plexiglass catwalk exactly at the level of the water. So it looked like the model were floating instead of walking. And there is another video that I included in the links of a clip from the fashion show so that you can also see it in movement. It was really something. Now that we have visited the beautiful fountain of Trevi, we are ready for our pit stop, I think, for our first pit stop. I know that Mara loves this place. This is a very tiny bakery just off the square where the fountain is, called Don Nino. It's actually a chain here in Rome. So there are 3 or 4 scattered throughout the downtown area. And they make beautiful pastries. But what I thought was best, because I'm imagining us on a July hot day in Rome, was a gelato. Gelato is one of the most famous, probably Italian desserts throughout the world, very much celebrated also by Hollywood and in movies. So I found some images. I thought, you know, if they could, why not us, right? This is a clip from, it's a screen from Roman Holiday. when Audrey Hepburn is enjoying a gelato on the Spanish Steps. So maybe you recognize the church behind them. It's the church that we saw before in our slide. This was just for fun. And the next one is for fun, but also to give you a suggestion if you ever find yourself in this predicament. Bill Murray says the best way to teach your kids about taxes is by eating 30% of their ice cream. And I found it very, very clever. So back to our walking tour. We're going to move on to our third stop. The arrow that I placed in the map is just to show you where we did our gelato stop, just off the square of the fountain. We're going to then move on to the Pantheon and stopping midway in a very lovely square that you have to cross on your way to the Pantheon when coming from the Trevi fountain. So this is the square. It's called the Square of Stone, literally translated, Piazza di Pietra. And coming from the Trevi fountain, we would be coming from there. So these buildings that you see in the photo now, we would be having them on our right side. And on our left side, we would be having this. This is what remains of the Temple of Hadrian. Emperor Hadrian had this temple built in the 2nd century AD. What remains are only 11 columns that are left from the side of the building. And as you can see, they were included in later buildings. So what you see behind the columns are, of course, more modern buildings that were designed in a way that they could include the ancient columns. And just to give you an idea of what the temple might have looked like originally, this is a rendering. So we now are left with the columns of just one of the two longer sides overlooking the little square. And then finally, we get to the Pantheon, the best preserved monument of all Roman antiquity in the world to this day. The Pantheon, in the shape that we see it today, was built in the 2nd century AD under Emperor Hadrian, the same one as the temple. Even though there was the same temple was here way before, it was built 20 or so years before Christ under Emperor Augustus, but then it burned down. And so Emperor Hadrian rebuilt it kind of in the same shape in the 2nd century. And I imagined that for the ones of you, at least who've been in Rome, you've seen the Pantheon, you've been inside. So I've included the next few slides, I've included images imagining that we are actually walking into the building. So what we would see step by step. And the first thing that we would do, of course, we would have to go through this forest really of columns that makes up the front portico just before getting to the door. So had we been walking through the columns and looking up, this is what we would see. We would see the beams of the roof of the portico. And I included this detail, not because it's particularly beautiful, but because it's kind of interesting. This is one of the best examples of recycling in Rome. And let me explain myself. The beams were not originally intended to be seen. Originally, when the Pantheon was built, they were covered up by a beautifully decorated coffered bronze ceiling. The bronze has gone because throughout the ages, at some point, there came a pope who needed the bronze for something else. And he decided to take the one from the portico of the Pantheon. So he took the bronze, he had it melted down, he cast cannons, and then with what was left, he asked the same artist who did the first fountain we saw, Bernini, to shape the main altar of St. Peter's Basilica, so that you can still to this day see if you visit the Basilica. So the bronze that comes from the Pantheon. And this is what I meant when I said this is one of the best examples of recycling of materials that happened for all ancient Roman monuments in Rome. They were reused a lot in newer buildings. Now, the next step, we are at the door, and so we start glimpsing the inside. This is a detail of the beautiful, magnificent interior. The Pantheon is a circular building. It was originally a temple and then turned into a Catholic church, which is to this day, it is a functioning church. And it is covered by this beautiful exact hemisphere of a dome. It is to this day the biggest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. And what I mean by unreinforced is that there's no pillar, there's no column holding it up. All the weight is held up just by the circular walls of the building itself. And let me tell you, architects and engineers marvel to this day how the heck the Romans, lacking technology, could achieve this feat. It's really something that they could do it. And to show you the actual dimensions of the coffering of the ceiling, this is a beautiful photo taken during a restoration that happened in 1925 that really shows you how small the people are when standing at the ceiling. So this is part of the coffering and it's huge. This image is a rendering, it's not a photo, but I included it because usually when you visit the Pantheon, it's always full of people. And so you don't really get to enjoy the beautiful flooring that this monument has. This is still the original flooring from the 2nd century. It is crazy that it's still in such mint conditions with all the millions of people who have walked onto it for centuries, but it is still the original, and it's a beautifully inlaid, multicolored marble floor. And there is a little detail also that you see and you notice when you're there only if you know. And it is these holes that are scattered here and there because the hole at the very top of the dome doesn't have any sort of covering. It's open and it's the only source of light. So whenever it rains, water falls into the monument. So there is a perfectly working drainage system in place with these holes serving the function of having the water flow, and then a cistern underground where they collect the water so that the monument is always kept dry. The exit, a beautiful image of the portico, again seen from the inside, from the door. And finally, an aerial photo to give you an exact idea of the shape of the whole building. You see the portico in the front and then the round church that was a temple at the back with the very big oculus, the hole in the middle of the dome. Now, I don't know if you knew, but there are steps on the side of the dome because, of course, you can ascend it. This is for maintenance reasons, but also sometimes, not anymore nowadays, unfortunately, but sometimes people get authorized. These were a group of students from the American Academy here in Rome who in 1975 were granted the right to ascend the Pantheon dome, and they could enjoy what a view they must have enjoyed from up top. It is very dangerous, of course, because there's no railing. As you can see, there's no security in place, so that's why they don't let people do it anymore. But for one instance, actually, when it's Pentecost, so just before Easter, 50 days before Easter, one of the events to celebrate the Pentecost here in Rome is that our firefighters climb the Pantheon and they shower the people inside the Pantheon with tons of red rose petals to symbolize, of course, the Pentecost and the religious festivities. So this is something, I've never seen it myself in person. I am never in Rome on Pentecost. I'm always on tour, unfortunately. And I know that it is very difficult, even if you are in Rome, because at some point they reach capacity and they shut the doors and they don't let anyone in anymore. So you have to be there hours in advance before the service and at the end of the service to see the ceremony of the petals. But it is something that you might keep in mind if you plan on coming to Rome in the springtime. Now for our second pit stop, had we been actually in person in the streets of Rome, I thought at this point we really need a coffee, right? So a little coffee shop, it's one of my favorites downtown in Rome. It's right on the corner of the square where the Pantheon is. It's called Tazza d'Oro, which translates literally into the golden cup. And this is not just a coffee place. They actually have their own plantations. So they grow organic coffee, which is really, really good. This is a photo that shows you the counter and the interior. They sell their coffee in bags, in airtight bags, so that you can take it home, ground or not ground. And it is a really, really good coffee. As for what we could order, I know you guys have many, many types of coffee in your coffee houses, but we have two staples really. Espresso, if you really need energy, it's a very concentrated sip of coffee in a very, very small cup. Or my favorite, cappuccino, which is the same amount of coffee, but with foamed milk added to it. And it is now in fashion, something that they call cappuccino art. So some of our baristas go crazy with decorating the coffee with the milk foam, giving it shapes. And you can see in the fourth image, some of them really go over the top with 3D imaging done with milk foam. So in some cafes, you might see a barista doing this while serving your cappuccino. This is a little Easter egg. I wanted to include this to show you that We have our coffee machines at home, of course. We don't just drink the coffee in the cafe, but we have no idea what a Keurig machine is. I'm sure that 90% of Italians have never heard of it. What we have is this, Mocha. This is a stovetop little machine. It is comprised of 3 different parts. You've got your bottom, which is the tank that you fill with water from the sink. You've got your filter in the middle that fits perfectly into the tank, and that's what you want to where you want to put your ground coffee. And then you've got the third part, the top, that is the one that gets filled with coffee. The water boils, it gets pumped into the filter, goes through the coffee grinds, gets flavored, of course, and then gets pumped into the upper part with all this nice cream at the top, which is all coffee, no milk in this. And so then you're ready to pour. And this is how we have coffee in the morning at home. One last image of the Golden Cup Cafe, and this is another little Easter egg. I noticed this myself when I was putting together this presentation. This sign that they kept outside of their cafe, it definitely pertained to the cafe. So it's the owners who decided to keep it there. This is a very old vintage sign. I remember it from when I was a kid, but you don't see these anymore in the streets in Italy. Of course, the sign meant, it once meant that inside the venue, you had a payphone. So if you needed to make a phone call, you could step inside and use phone tokens. These were our phone tokens, and I remember them from when I was a kid because they were in use until we switched to the euro currency, which was 2001. And I've also found a picture, this is just for your curiosity, I found a picture of US payphone tokens, but don't worry if you don't remember them, because I learned that you guys stopped using them in 1944. So at the end of World War II, so you used them way less than us, and then you switched to either cards or other forms of payment for your payphones. Now, let's move on to our final destination, Piazza Navona. We're actually going to make a very quick stop in a very lovely square right behind the Pantheon, and then on to Piazza Navona. This is the square I was mentioning. You can see the Pantheon in the background, so we're really at the back of the monument. This lovely square, usually tourists don't go here. They don't know about this place. It is not on the route, on the direct route between these monuments. So this is really something extra that you wouldn't probably be seeing had you been on a tour in Rome. It is called the Square of Minerva because of an ancient temple dedicated to the goddess Minerva that once stood here, that is not here anymore, but left its name behind. And nowadays there is this very, very peculiar monument at the very middle of the square. The building that you see to the right, the orangey and white one, is also a historical building. It was built as a convent for Dominican friars. And I don't know if you knew this, but Dominican friars were the ones in charge of the Holy Inquisition. They were the ones running the tribunal. And this building was the actual seat of the tribunal. So for instance, this is the place where Galileo had his trial in 1633 and was obliged to recant his theories because deemed heretical. And it was also a convent for the friars. So they actually lived in this building. Now, so keep in mind the building. The monument at the very middle is an obelisk. We have plenty in Rome. The ancient Romans were crazy with Egyptian art. So Egyptian art flooded the city once Egypt was conquered by the Romans. So this is an example of a very tiny one that was mounted on top of a statue representing an elephant. This was done by the will of a Pope, Alexander VII. During his reign, the obelisk was found, and he decided to have an artist, surprise, surprise, the same Bernini as before. He really did a lot of works during the 1600s in Rome. He decided to have the artist shape the pedestal for the obelisk as an elephant, because the elephant is the symbol of a wise man, and he wanted to be regarded as such by his contemporaries. So Bernini shaped it in the form of an elephant. The funny story behind this monument is that if you remember the building is the orangey building that pertained to the Dominican friars, is exactly at the rear of the elephant. Where the elephant has its rear, that's where the building is facing. And this is because the Dominicans saw the design that Bernini had prepared before sculpting this pedestal, and they criticized it heavily. They didn't believe that it could uphold the weight of the obelisk, and they said it will come down for sure. And Bernini was famously had a temper, yeah. So he got pissed off because of this, and he decided to place the elephant in a way so that the rear was overlooking the friars, and he also sculpted the tail of the elephant a little bit to the side so that the elephant is actually exposing its butthole to the Dominican friars, so they would look out of the window and see that. They also say, this is a little bit of a legend, but they also, some say that the elephant looks like he's laughing, he's cackling, looking back towards the windows where the Dominican friars would have been laughing in their faces. So it's a form of spite. Bernini did it as a form of spite. Behind the elephant is a church, the Church of Minerva. And this is a church that very, very rarely tourists or foreigners get to visit because they simply don't know about it. It's not a very well-known church for foreigners. But this is my other suggestion. If you come to Rome next time, step inside. First of all, it's going to be a fantastic pause from all the crowds because it's usually very, very empty. And it is a treasure trove of art history. This is just one example that I placed here. I know everybody has heard of Michelangelo. One of his statues is in this church, but there are so many more works of art featured inside this building. So really do step inside and enjoy all that you can see inside this church if you're in Rome the next time. Finally, we get to our final destination, the Piazza Navona. Piazza means a square in Italian. I didn't say it at the beginning, but maybe you got it so far. So in the square of Navona, which is one of the most peculiar, I would say, squares in Rome, it has one main monument on it, which is the Fountain of the Four Rivers. Surprise, again by Bernini. So we are really doing a walk through Baroque Rome tonight. The Fountain of the Four Rivers has an obelisk, the ever-present obelisk on top, and it represents four rivers in the shape of four men. So they are the human representation of the four best-known rivers at the time. This is another angle. It's kind of difficult to take all the fountain into one picture, but you've got your Pope's sigil in the middle because, of course, this was commissioned by a Pope to Bernini. You've got the rocks. The one on the left is the representation of the Rio de la Plata to symbolize the continent of America. The Danube River to the right to symbolize Europe, of course. These two are details of these two statues. And on the other side, you've got the Ganges River to symbolize Asia, the continent of Asia, and finally the river Nile symbolizing Africa. The Nile, the statue representing the Nile, has its head covered because at the time it symbolizes the fact that they didn't know the origin, the geographical origin, the spring where the river started from. And then you've got these beautiful sculpting of animals also representing the regions of the four rivers. So you've got the horse, you've got the lion, this is a crocodile, if you can tell. You've got a serpent for land animals, another photo of the whole fountain with the obelisk on top. Back to Piazza Navona, again, as I did for the Spanish steps, I tried to find things that usually you don't get to hear about when you visit these places with a regular guided tour. And these two photos show you Piazza Navona at a time long forgotten when they used to flood it during the summer months as a refreshment for the citizens of Rome. So the square was not paved until this time. They did it until 1866, for a couple centuries. It wasn't paved yet, and the flooring of the square was a little concave. So they just needed stop the filtering system of the fountains. The water would overflow and kind of flood the square, turning it into a lake so people could enjoy it on carriages. If you can tell from the photo on the right, it's a little bit blurry because it's a very old one, but there are people on carriages, people on horses, people on foot enjoying the square in the summer months. And then they paved it. They paved it with the typical way of paving that they use here in Rome for historical downtown areas. These cube squared blocks of stone called San Pietrini. San Pietrini literally translates into small St. Peter's in the plural. And they say it's because the first time they were employed, it was to pave the square in front of the Church of St. Peter, of the Basilica of St. Peter. So they took the name from that. You can imagine what a nightmare it is to walk onto the San Pietrini with high heels. Many high heels died in between the different San Pietrinis, in the spots between the San Pietrini. And then finally, I wanted to show you an image that I called, this is my name, my title, Coronavirus Effect. Because what happened during our quarantine that just ended here in Italy is that nature took over. And it didn't just happen here, of course, it happened all throughout the world. I've seen images from all countries, but what happened here in this square is that the non-presence of human being turned it into a green lawn. It was turned into a green field, basically. An image from above of the square to show you the very peculiar shape that the square has. And as everything in Rome, it does have a reason for this square. It wasn't just thought of it this way. This is because anciently, in the same spot, there was a stadium. This was Emperor Domitian's stadium, built to house athletic games, sort of the Olympic Games for the ancient Greeks. And the square got built on top of the spot where the stadium was. So it's just an overlayering in time, and it retained the same exact shape of the stadium. My final suggestion, if you come to Rome, is that you can visit an archaeological area underneath the square that still has what remains of the ancient stadium. So you can see the archaeological remains of the Stadium of Domitian. If you do want to go, the entrance is there. I am done for tonight, and I just had a very last note. I know you guys, when people hear about Rome, we think about the Colosseum and we think about the Sistine Chapel and the Vatican, and there is a reason why we didn't include it tonight. Mara and I, we talked about it, and we would have been here for 6 hours at least if we had to talk about also the archaeological remains from ancient Rome and the Vatican treasure trove. So we decided to keep it more simple and to show you a side of Rome that was important throughout its history, even though it doesn't tap into these two main monumental areas. But please, if you are interested in these other two parts of Rome or in anything else in Rome, let us know, let Mara know, and we might be able to organize another encounter focusing only on those. So I thank you for your attention, and I hope to hear from you again soon. Grazie.
Okay. So thank you very much, Elena. I am going to take over right now and just say that we're going to go into a Q&A, question answers. I just want to say thank you very much. I know that you could do this in your sleep if you were walking us on foot, but to do it virtually is a whole different story. And I'm sure it took a lot of time and energy and preparation. For that, when we're on tour or when we're in a virtual tour, of course, tipping is something that's discretionary, it's optional, but if you do want to tip the tour director, by all means, you can send it via Venmo or PayPal. I would suggest if you have a smartphone, just take a picture of my screen right now or do a screenshot so that you have the information on how to tip Elena. But please know that I'll also follow up in an email and put that on the email. If you're also interested in knowing about our group, my travel group, and where we go, there's some information at the bottom of this slide, but I'll also include that on the email. But for now, I'd really like to thank everybody for attending and then turn it over for questions. We're going to go on to questions at this point. So if you want to stay online, you want to put some questions through, and then Elena, I think we already have a half a dozen or so questions. We can answer them as they're presented. So again, thanks for your hour. I know your time is precious, but I think that this was an awesome, I actually have been to Rome more than a handful of times, and I learned some things that I never knew. So it was really refreshing and a nice perspective. So thank you, Elena. Are you ready, Elena, to go into a Q&A?
I am. And I was actually reading some of the questions and also some of just the observations that someone had. For instance, Jeffrey, and also, let me just get it. And also Mary pointed out that the tokens that I showed, the NYC tokens were actually used on the subway and not for payphone. So thank you guys, because that was an information that I found online, and having never seen them myself, I didn't know. So thank you for that observation. I will correct my presentation for sure. And then we have other questions. Let me see. The first one was from Mary Ann, and she asks, what month and what time of day is the Vatican least crowded? I was there a few years back in mid-September and people were literally shoulder to shoulder. Thank you. Yes, it makes me smile because it is so true, Marianne, it is so true. I must say that the best time to come to Rome would be either the month of February. That's a very good time. It is very low touristic season, so there's no one around. And again, winters are mild, so you wouldn't be finding cold weather. Or October. October, it's a little more crowded than February, but it is a famous month in Rome for the weather. And until that time, for the summer months, the spring, the summer months, and the very early fall months, the Vatican opens its door until late on Friday evenings. So of course you can book it in advance as for every time you go to the Vatican museums. So my suggestion would be, if you can, book it on a Friday night, you will be alone. Otherwise, any other time of the year, millions of people together with you inside. Yeah. I hope this answers your question. The next one is, when I was last in Rome, I enjoyed sitting on the steps and the Spanish steps and on all sorts of steps. And now I heard you're not allowed to do this. Can you tell us why? Yes, since recently, since a couple of years ago, the City Hall decided to put in place some new rules regarding basically decorum around the main monumental areas. So because people were really doing whatever they wanted, us Italians were not really known for respecting the rules. So people were sitting on the Spanish steps and eating whatever, or they were sitting on the rim of the Trevi fountain, even touching the water to get refreshment during the summer months. This is not allowed anymore. You get a very steep fine if you do it. And it's really just a decorum thing because of the number of tourists that we get every year. It would be chaos if they just let everybody do. So now they have guards with their whistles. If they see you, they whistle and you know you're in trouble. So that's what happens today. What was the punishment for the guy that poured the red dye into the fountain? I think I went into that. He was arrested, he had to pay a fine, and he had to pay for the cleaning of the dye both times. How and why? Oh, I slid. How and why was the Piazza Navona built on top of the ancient stadium and not just in its stead? Oh, well, this is something that happened all throughout the area that Rome covers today. A little bit it happened just naturally, geologically, you know, detriment, and especially having a river running through the city, it brings a lot of debris with it. So it piles up in time and raises the level of the ground. Sometimes the ancient Romans did it themselves to just destroy monuments built by someone they didn't like after they died, and building on top of the ruins of what they had destroyed something else. And then sometimes it just happened because the later eras didn't have the respect that we have nowadays for antiquity. And so they just built on top of ancient ruins if they weren't using them anymore. And then we have, where does the money thrown into the Trevi fountain go? I think I covered it, a charity. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Wendy. I didn't know you were in this midst. I've been to Rome several times and have seen these sites. If I come to Rome, is there a way to get a tour of things that tourists don't normally go to, like the church you mentioned or the ruins under the Piazza Navona? Absolutely. This was David asking this. Absolutely. If you really want to go off the beaten path, my main suggestion would be get yourself a private guide, a licensed local Rome guide, and ahead of time, make sure you let her or him know that that's what you want to do. And so you can arrange together, the guide will have several suggestions that you can choose from so that you can really tailor the tour and see what you want to see. And then we've got Sue. Hi, Sue. This is a comment. Now I know why it was such a big deal for my mom to have a suit made by the Fontana sisters in the 1960s. Fantastic. You will have to tell me this story at some point. Reines. In the state of the Four Rivers, I think some of the people were flinching or covering their faces from falling rock. Is this true, and why? Yes, there is one of the four statues that is seen, the Rio de la Plata one. It is seen, it was sculpted with his hand raised like this, as if he's shielding himself. This was just done for theatrical effect and dramatic effect by Bernini. But the legend, because of course there's always a legend behind these things in Rome, is that Bernini didn't like, and this is true, the architect who built the church that is right on the side of the fountain. And so he sculpted the figure like this, as if he's shielding himself from the view of this horrible building that was really just too ugly to look at, or because he's afraid he's going to collapse because the architect was not good. But it is really a legend. This time we know for sure, because the church was not there when Bernini built the fountain. It came later, so not possible. Corinne, have you ever been to America? I have. I have plenty times, and actually my last time was a long time ago, so it's time I come back. And I was very gracefully hosted by Mara for a couple of weeks. I stayed at her beautiful house. What is your favorite site or monument to take visitors to? Oh, that's a very good question. In the Rome area, I would say just outside of Rome, on the coastline, close to the airport, is an ancient city by the Romans. It's called Ostia. And I am sure all of you guys have heard of Pompeii and the ruins, the ancient ruin of the city of Pompeii that are so beautifully kept. Ostia is the same. It's the Roman Pompeii. It was the harbor for ancient Romans, and it is left as it was at the time. So it is a beautiful excursion. It's a day excursion or half-day excursion from Rome. It's way closer than Pompeii if you are based in Rome, and it's way quieter. Pompeii is full of millions of people every day. Ostia is almost always empty. So that would be my choice. And I love taking people there. No?
Okay. That's awesome. So again, thank you, Elena. I can't wait to see you next year. And thank you for everyone who attended. If you have any suggestions or if you have information that you'd like to forward to either of us, you know my email address, you know my Facebook account, you probably know my cell phone. Feel free to connect with us. I'm going to end the session. Thank you again. Have a good night and enjoy your dinners.
Thank you so much.